October 12th, 1968, 9:47 p.m., Lenox Avenue, Harlem. Rain slicked the sidewalk black. Neon from the club windows bled into the puddles. A saxophone cried somewhere inside, sharp and tired. At a corner table near the back, Bumpy Johnson folded his napkin with slow hands. Across from him sat a younger man, shoulders tight, eyes jumping to the door every few seconds. Frank Lucas, clean suit, fresh shoes, nerves humming like a live wire. The gun was on the table, not pointed, not raised. Just there. Bumpy didn't look at it, Frank did. "Put that away," Bumpy said, quiet, flat, under 10 words. Frank swallowed. His hand hovered near the grip. He didn't touch it. Outside, a bus hissed. Somewhere, a glass shattered. The rain picked up, tapping the windows like fingers asking to be let in. This was the moment that mattered. Because in less than a year, Bumpy Johnson would be dead. And decades later, in 2019, Frank Lucas would die alone. No visitors, no calls, no one to claim the body. What happened at this table tied those two endings together. Frank leaned forward, his voice cracked, then steadied. "I built something," he said. "I won't be stepped on." Bumpy finally looked up. Old eyes. Heavy. Tired of men saying the same thing. "You're sitting where you don't belong," Bumpy said. Frank laughed once, too loud. "Wrong. Times change." The saxophone stopped. The silence pressed in. Bumpy nodded, almost gentle. "They always do." Frank's foot bounced under the table, sweat crawled down his spine. He'd come here thinking he had leverage, thinking the city was shifting, that the old man across from him was fading. But what Frank didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that Bumpy had already read the ending. Bumpy pushed his coffee aside. The cup rattled. "Listen close," he said. "This is free." Frank leaned in despite himself. "You keep walking like this," Bumpy continued, "you won't hear footsteps anymore." Frank's jaw tightened. "You threatening me?" Bumpy shook his head once. "No." He tapped the table right next to the gun. "I'm warning you." Rain hammered harder now. A siren wailed in the distance, then faded. The smell of cigarettes and wet wool filled the room. Frank stared at the gun. His fingers trembled. Bumpy's voice dropped lower. "You think men die loud," he said. "They don't." Frank looked up. "What do you know about my end?" Bumpy's eyes didn't blink. "You'll die alone." The words landed heavy. No drama, no raised voice. Just a sentence. Frank stood too fast. His chair scraped. Heads turned. Somewhere, a bartender froze mid-pour. "You don't scare me," Frank said, but his breath came short. Bumpy didn't move. "I don't need to." Frank snatched the gun, shoved it into his coat, and backed toward the door. His heel slipped on the wet floor. He caught himself, face burning. Bumpy watched him go. As Frank disappeared into the rain, Bumpy reached for his napkin again, folded it once more. Precise. Outside, Frank stepped into the night believing he'd won something. But the warning stayed with him. Years later, when the rooms went quiet, when the phones stopped ringing, when there was no one left to sit across from him, those words would come back. "You'll die alone." And Frank Lucas had no idea how true they were. Harlem didn't fear Frank Lucas yet. That was the problem. Frank walked north through the rain, coat collar up, gun heavy against his ribs. Every step splashed anger into the street. He told himself he'd stood his ground, told himself the old man at that table was yesterday's news. But his hands were still shaking. Frank had come up the hard way. Back rooms, trunks, Long nights counting cash under buzzing bulbs. For years he'd been the shadow behind Bumpy Johnson, watching, learning, waiting. And waiting eats at a man. Frank wanted more than scraps, more than being sent, more than nodding yes. He wanted his own name on the door, even if no door existed. At home, his place smelled like starch and coffee. He locked the door, leaned his forehead against it, and breathed. Slow. Controlled. The gun came out of his coat and hit the table with a dull thud. Frank stared at it. "You'll die alone." He shook his head like the words were smoke. "No," he muttered. "Not me." Frank had a plan, that was the difference. Bumpy worked Harlem, clubs, corners, old alliances. Frank was thinking bigger, routes that didn't touch the street, money that didn't smell like yesterday. But plans don't erase fear. They sharpen it. The next morning, Harlem woke sticky and gray. Steam rolled off the grates. Frank walked fast, eyes up, jaw set. He checked reflections in windows, counted footsteps behind him. Every man with a hat looked like a threat. At a diner near 125th, Frank slid into a booth across from Big Sam, a heavy man with a scar like a crease in his cheek. Big Sam didn't smile much. He didn't need to. "You look rough," Big Sam said. "Didn't sleep?" Big Sam stirred his coffee. "Word is you met him." Frank's eyes snapped up. "Who told you?" Big Sam shrugged. "Doesn't matter." Frank leaned in, voice low and fast. "I'm not backing down." Big Sam studied him. "Didn't say you should." A waitress set down eggs. The plate rattled. Frank didn't touch it. "He's old," Frank said. "He can't see what's coming." Big Sam chewed slow. "He sees more than most." Frank's fork clinked against the plate. "I'm done being small." Big Sam wiped his mouth. "Big men draw big shadows." Frank pushed back from the booth. "I can handle shadows." Outside, the city moved like it always had. Cars honked. Kids laughed. Somewhere, music played. It looked normal. That scared Frank more than gunfire, because normal meant nobody saw the line he'd crossed. Over the next weeks, Frank moved faster, louder. Money flowed. New faces showed up with quick smiles and empty questions. Frank paid them anyway. He needed bodies. He needed belief. At night, he dreamed of tables, guns resting between hands, old eyes watching him breathe. He started carrying the gun everywhere, slept with it under his pillow. The metal stayed cold even in summer. Meanwhile, Bumpy stayed quiet. No threats, no calls, no messages. That silence pressed harder than words. One evening, Frank stood alone in his apartment, counting cash. The radio murmured low. He paused, listening. Footsteps passed outside. A door slammed. His heart jumped, then slowed. Frank exhaled. "That's it," he told himself. I'm free." But the truth sat heavy in his chest. He wasn't challenging a man. He was challenging time. And time doesn't lose clean. Somewhere across Harlem, Bumpy Johnson looked out a window, watching the same streets. He knew exactly where Frank was headed, and he let him walk there. Because the most dangerous moment isn't the warning. It's the silence after. 2 weeks later, the heat came early. Harlem baked under it, shirts stuck, tempers flared, windows stayed open, and voices carried farther than they should. Frank Lucas stood in the back room of a small club off Lenox, jacket off, sleeves rolled. Cash lay in neat stacks on the table. A fan rattled in the corner, pushing warm air nowhere useful. The door creaked. Frank didn't turn. "You late?" he said. A familiar voice answered, calm as ever. "Time moves slower when you're patient." Frank froze. He turned slowly. Bumpy Johnson stood in the doorway, hat on, hands empty. No bodyguards in sight. Just him in the room. The fan clicked. The music out front thumped once, then died. Frank's throat went dry. "You got nerve," Frank said. His voice wavered, then steadied. "Coming here alone?" Bumpy stepped inside, closed the door behind him. The latch sounded loud. "Alone is relative," Bumpy said. Frank's eyes flicked to the corners, to the shadows, to the thin wall behind him. "You here to talk?" Frank asked. Bumpy glanced at the money. "You've been busy." Frank smiled, tight. "Business is good." Bumpy walked closer, each step measured, shoes quiet on the floor. "Business gets loud before it breaks." Frank reached for a cigarette. His hands shook. He lit it anyway, dragged deep. Smoke curled between them. "I warned you," Bumpy said. Frank exhaled smoke. "You warned me about nothing." Bumpy stopped at the table. The fan pushed smoke into his face. He didn't blink. "You think I didn't see this coming," Bumpy said. "That's the mistake." Frank leaned back, forcing ease into his posture. "You're standing in my room." Bumpy nodded. "And you're still breathing." The words landed heavy. Frank's jaw tightened. His fingers brushed the gun at his waist. Cold metal. Comforting. Dangerous. "You don't scare me," Frank said again. Bumpy's eyes dropped to Frank's hand. "Your hand says otherwise." Frank pulled it away. "You want something?" Bumpy tapped the table right next to the cash. "I want you to slow down." Frank laughed, short, sharp. Too late. For a moment, nobody spoke. Sweat rolled down Frank's spine. The fan rattled harder, like it knew something was wrong. Outside, a car backfired. Frank flinched. Bumpy noticed. "You're moving like a man chased," Bumpy said. "I'm moving like a man winning," Frank snapped. Bumpy leaned closer. Close enough that Frank could smell his cologne. Old. Faint. Steady. "Winning makes men careless," Bumpy said. Frank stood. The chair scraped. His breathing sped up. "I'm done being told where I belong." Bumpy didn't move. "You belong alive." Frank's voice rose. "I built this." Bumpy's voice stayed low. "And you built it fast." Frank's chest heaved. He wiped sweat from his brow. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. "You come here to threaten me?" Frank asked. Bumpy shook his head once. "I came to see your eyes." Frank swallowed. "And?" Bumpy studied him, long, careful. "They're tired." Frank slammed his palm on the table. Cash jumped. "I'm not backing down," he said. "Not now." Bumpy straightened. "Then listen close." Frank leaned in despite himself. "You think control is noise?" Bumpy said. "It isn't." He turned toward the door. Frank called after him. "You walk out, it's over." Bumpy paused, his hand on the latch. "No," he said. "It's just begun." The door opened. Music rushed back in, laughter, glass clinking. Bumpy disappeared into it. Frank stood alone in the back room, heart pounding, smoke hanging heavy. He picked up the gun and set it on the table. The metal felt colder than before. What Frank didn't know, what made his confidence dangerous, was that this wasn't a warning anymore. It was a setup. 3 nights later, the call came. Frank Lucas was halfway through a late dinner when the phone rang. He stared at it like it might bite. The room smelled of grease and onions. The radio murmured low. He picked up. "Speak." A man's voice rushed. "He wants to meet." Frank's grip tightened. "Who?" A pause. Breath on the line. Him! Frank didn't ask where, he already knew. Small's Paradise, after midnight, back room. The line went dead. Frank stood still, listening to the dial tone hum. His heart thudded. Not fear, he told himself, but anticipation. This was it, the moment things tipped. He slid the gun into his coat, checked it twice, loaded. Outside, Harlem sweated. The club lights flickered like tired eyes. Music spilled into the street, thick and sweet. Frank walked through the crowd, shoulders squared, chin up. Inside Small's bodies moved close, dresses clung, shoes scuffed. Laughter popped like sparks. Frank pushed past, eyes locked on the hallway to the back. A hand grabbed his arm. It was Big Sam. "You sure?" Big Sam asked. Frank nodded once. "Stay close." Big Sam hesitated. "I got a bad feeling." Frank leaned in. "Then keep it quiet." They reached the back room. The door was ajar. Light spilled out, thin and yellow. Frank entered alone. The room was smaller than he remembered. A table, 2 chairs, 1 ashtray, smoke already hanging heavy. Bumpy Johnson sat with his back to the wall, thus calm, hands folded, no gun in sight. Frank shut the door. "You called," Frank said. Bumpy nodded. "Sit." Frank didn't. "Say what you came to say." Bumpy looked at the chair across from him. "You're in a hurry?" Frank's jaw tightened. "I don't wait anymore." Bumpy sighed. "Not tired. Measured." "That's the problem." Frank's hand slipped inside his coat, wrapped around the grip. "You got something for me?" Frank asked. Bumpy met his eyes. "I got the truth." Frank laughed, short, sharp. "Keep it." Bumpy leaned forward. The chair creaked. "You think I came here blind?" Frank's smile faded. "What's that supposed to mean?" Bumpy tapped the table. Once. "I know who brought you." Frank froze. "Brought me where?" Bumpy's voice dropped. "To this point." The room felt colder. Frank pulled the gun halfway out. The metal caught the light. "Careful." Bumpy didn't flinch. "You ever wonder why I didn't stop you?" Frank's breathing sped. "You tried." Bumpy shook his head. "No, I watched." Frank stepped closer. "You're stalling." Bumpy's eyes flicked to the door. "Count the seconds." Frank hesitated. "What?" From the other side of the wall, footsteps, slow, heavy. Then another set. Frank's heart jumped. Bumpy spoke quietly. "You think betrayal always comes from above?" Frank turned toward the door. "Who's out there?" Bumpy answered without blinking. "The man who called you." Frank's mouth went dry. "He wouldn't." Bumpy tilted his head. "He already did." The handle rattled. Frank yanked the gun free, pointing it at Bumpy. His hand shook. "Call them off." Bumpy spread his hands. "I can't." The door opened. Big Sam stepped in. Frank stared at him, stunned. "You?" Big Sam didn't meet his eyes. "It went too far." Frank laughed, breathless. "You set me up?" Big Sam swallowed. "I tried to warn you." Frank swung the gun between them. "You think I won't?" Bumpy cut in, calm as stone. "Look at your gun." Frank glanced down. The slide was back. Empty. His stomach dropped. Bumpy's voice was steady. "You checked it twice." Frank shook his head. No, I..." Big Sam spoke, barely above a whisper. "I switched it." Frank's hands trembled. The gun felt useless, light, like a toy. Bumpy stood. The chair scraped softly. "I told you men die quiet." Frank backed toward the wall. Sweat poured. "You said you wouldn't threaten me." Bumpy stepped closer. "I didn't." He stopped an arm's length away. "I warned you." Frank's legs felt weak. "So this is it?" Bumpy looked at him for a long moment. "No." Frank blinked. "Then what?" Bumpy turned to Big Sam. "Take him out." Frank's head snapped up. "You're not killing me?" Bumpy shook his head once. "Living with it will be worse." Big Sam grabbed Frank's arm. Frank struggled, panic breaking loose. "You said family," Frank gasped. "You said loyalty." Big Sam's grip tightened. "I said slow down." They dragged Frank toward the door. Frank kicked, cursed, begged. The music outside swallowed the noise. Bumpy watched, unmoving. As the door closed, he spoke one last time. "You'll die alone." The latch clicked, and Frank Lucas finally understood. Frank didn't sleep that night. They dumped him 3 blocks from Smalls, hard, careless. He hit the pavement on his shoulder, breath knocked out. By the time he staggered up, the club noise was gone. Just wind, trash skittering, a distant train rattling steel. Big Sam was already gone. Frank stood there alone, hands empty, coat twisted, heart punching his ribs. That was the punishment. Not a bullet, not blood. Silence. Back in his apartment, Frank locked every lock twice. He tore the place apart, checking corners, closets, under the bed. He found nothing. That scared him more. The phone didn't ring. No footsteps outside, no knock. Morning came gray and thin. Frank sat at the table staring at the useless gun, jaw clenched, until it hurt. He waited for retaliation. It didn't come. Instead, business dried up. Men stopped showing. Deliveries missed. Questions went unanswered. When Frank walked the street, eyes slid past him, doors closed. Conversations died when he entered rooms. It wasn't loud. It was surgical. Across Harlem, Bumpy Johnson did nothing visible. He ate where he always ate, walked where he always walked. No speeches, no threats. He had already won. Frank tried to force it back. Raised his voice, threw money at problems. None of it stuck. Every move felt watched. Every plan leaked before it began. One night, Frank confronted a man who owed him, pushed him against a wall, gun out, shaking. The man didn't flinch. "You're finished," he said, quiet, certain. Frank pulled the trigger. Click. The sound echoed louder than a gunshot. The man laughed once and walked away. Frank stood there, arm locked, face burning. People stared. Someone shook their head. That was the moment it broke. Weeks passed, then months. Frank survived. He always would. But survival wasn't victory. He moved from room to room like a ghost, always listening, always waiting. The warning stayed lodged in his chest like a splinter. "You'll die alone." Years later, Bumpy Johnson collapsed in a restaurant. Heart gone, body still. No gun, no enemies in the room. Frank heard the news on the radio. He turned it off. Time did what Bumpy promised. Decades rolled. Faces changed. Streets shifted. Frank outlived almost everyone who mattered to him. Friends vanished. Family drifted. Calls slowed. Then stopped. In 2019, Frank Lucas died in a small, quiet place. No crowd, no noise. No one sitting across from him. Just a bed, a wall, and silence. Somewhere far back in his mind, a table waited. A gun rested on it. An old man watched him breathe, and the warning finally made sense. The night swallowed what happened at Smalls. By sunrise, the back room was clean. Ashtray emptied. Chairs back where they belonged. No blood, no broken glass. Just the smell of smoke clinging to the walls like a memory that wouldn't leave. That was intentional. In Harlem, bodies made noise. Silence made rules. Frank Lucas didn't show his face for days. When he finally did, he walked slower, shoulders tighter, eyes always searching reflections. Men noticed. They always did. On Lenox Avenue, a bartender leaned close to another. "You hear about Frank?" "Yeah, that's bad." No name spoken, no details shared, just a look, a pause. And then the glasses kept moving. Big Sam vanished for a while. Some said he went south, others said he stayed put and kept his head down. Either way, nobody asked questions. Questions got people stuck in rooms they didn't leave. Across town, Bumpy Johnson walked the streets like always. Same pace, same posture. He nodded to shop owners, stopped to talk with old men on stoops, bought fruit from the same cart. But something had shifted. People stepped aside quicker. Conversation straightened when he passed. Not fear, recognition. Like a storm that didn't need thunder anymore. One afternoon, a young runner approached Frank outside a building. Kid couldn't be more than 19. Nervous, eyes wide. "You want me to—" the kid started. Frank cut him off. "Get lost." The kid didn't argue. He ran. Frank stood there, hands clenched, watching the boy disappear. He felt smaller than he ever had, not weaker, emptier. That night, Frank sat alone in his apartment, lights off. Sirens echoed somewhere far away. He held the gun in his lap, turning it over and over, cold, useless. Across the city, Bumpy sat at a table with coffee and nothing else. He folded his napkin, unfolded it, listened to the room breathe. He didn't smile. Because the job wasn't to destroy Frank. It was to leave him standing. The streets understood that lesson fast. You could challenge a man. You could even outlive him. But once you were cut loose, once the phone stopped ringing, once nobody needed you, there was no coming back. Frank Lucas learned that alone, night after night, with no one left to argue with. And Harlem moved on without him. Years passed. Harlem changed its clothes, old clubs closed, new signs went up. Faces that once filled rooms faded into photographs behind glass. The streets kept moving like they always do, pretending nothing sticks. But one thing stayed. Men stopped mistaking noise for control. Frank Lucas lived long enough to see it. Long enough to realize the worst thing that can happen to a man isn't dying young. It's being left behind while the world keeps breathing without you. No visits, no calls, no one asking what he thought. Just rooms that stayed quiet too long. Bumpy Johnson didn't get statues. He didn't need them. What he left behind wasn't a name, it was a rule. A simple one. If you move too fast, someone lets you. If you move too loud, someone listens. And if you forget who's watching, you end up talking to yourself. Frank did. In the end, the warning wasn't about death. It was about isolation. About being cut loose, so cleanly you don't even feel the blade. A table, a gun, an old man's voice, calm and certain. You'll die alone. Frank Lucas did. And the irony? He had years to think about it. If this story shocked you, wait until you hear about Bumpy's most dangerous enemy, the one who almost got him first. Drop a comment. Would you rather die young and feared, or live long and forgotten? Subscribe for the next story, because the streets always remember, even when people don't.